A woman found dead in her own bathtub. No forced entry, no witnesses, and a husband with a bizarre story. What really happened inside this Orlando home? Watch this video till the end for a dark secret that will leave you speechless. Orlando, 2018. A city of sun and sprawl, where old homes are torn down and rebuilt into modern showcases of ambition. That's what David Trance wanted. A statement piece. A transformation so dramatic it could be broadcast on television. The house on East Copeland was his passion project. A 4,000 square foot maze of raw beams, half-done tile work, and dust-covered plans. But to David, it was his masterpiece in progress. He'd been watching Zombie House flipping for years, obsessed, drawn to the idea of taking something old and broken and making it worthy of a spotlight. And now, the producers were interested in his home, his name, his life. There was just one problem. The house wasn't finished. Not even close. So David moved into the garage. The air was thick and hot, tools stacked beside a folding cot. Meanwhile, Shanti, his wife, lived upstairs in the apartment above the garage. It was a strange arrangement, one that didn't go unnoticed by friends. But on camera, things looked different. Shanti was successful. She ran her own financial consulting firm, a dedicated mother to her son, Jackson. Smart, focused, private. She wasn't chasing a spotlight. She was building a future. She paid for the renovations. Every tile, every beam, every contractor. And yet, her name was never on the deed. Those close to her began to ask quiet questions. Was she truly safe in this arrangement? Was she heard? Respected? She once told a friend, "If anything ever happens to me, he gets everything. I get nothing." The words were casual, a passing comment. But after April 24th, they would echo louder than anyone expected. The dream house was never finished. And days before the cameras were set to roll, the woman funding the entire vision was found dead, just feet away from the marble she paid to install. April 24th, 2018. The call came in just after 1 p.m. David Trance told the dispatcher his wife had slipped, that he found her unconscious in the bathtub. His voice was even, without urgency. He didn't mention any sounds of distress. No scream, no crash, just silence. First responders arrived quickly. The house looked more like a construction site than a home. The front steps were covered in dust. Inside, boxes lined the walls, tools cluttered the floor, and wires dangled from unfinished ceilings. They found Shanti in the upstairs bathroom. Her body was curled unnaturally in the tub, legs twisted, arms limp. She wasn't submerged. There was no water. Her skin was cool, her clothes damp only at the edges, as if she had been placed there long after the tub had been drained. David waited downstairs. Calm, cooperative. He told them he had been out walking the dogs. He said he came back and found her like that. But something didn't add up. She was almost dry. The tub showed no sign of recent use. No warmth, no condensation, no overflow. Paramedics declared her dead at the scene. There was no visible bruising, no broken skin, no signs of a struggle, at least not at first glance. Still, detectives were called. Something in the layout didn't feel right. The timeline was too smooth, too clean. David said she'd slipped, that the tub had been full of water, that it was all just a tragic accident. But the evidence wasn't cooperating with his story. And then came the second discovery, a detail that pulled at the seams of the entire narrative. Her ring, the one she never took off, was missing from her hand. The diamond was valued at over $15,000. A flawless cut, mounted on white gold. Shani wore it constantly, at work, at home, even in photos where she looked tired, distracted, or worn down. The ring was always there, but now it was gone. At first, it seemed like a possible robbery. That's what David suggested. He told detectives the ring must have been stolen. Maybe a break-in, he said. Someone slipped in while he was out walking the dogs. Police searched the house. Nothing was broken. No doors forced open. No windows smashed. No valuables missing from shelves or drawers. There was cash in plain view on the counter. Expensive electronics untouched. Shanti's diamond earrings still in place. Her handbag, sitting right next to the sink. It didn't look like someone had come in to steal. It looked like someone had taken just one thing. Detectives took photos of the bathroom, every angle, every surface. But it wasn't just the ring that concerned them. It was the staging. The towels were too neatly folded. The countertop too clean. There were no signs of a fall. No impact marks on porcelain. No water spatter. No chaos. It looked more like a scene that had been arranged. They pressed David again. Why hadn't he tried CPR? Why hadn't he called immediately when he found her? His answers stayed the same, calm, consistent, and distant. But behind the scenes, detectives began working quietly, comparing timelines, analyzing his phone, studying the home's layout. What they saw didn't match the story he'd given. And what they couldn't see, the ring, became the most haunting clue of all. They brought him in that afternoon. David Trance sat in a beige-walled interview room at the Orlando Police Department. His posture was stiff, his hands folded, resting just above his knees. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't raise his voice. For hours, he answered every question, slowly, carefully, without emotion. He said he woke up early, took the dogs out, went for a jog. Said Shawnee was still upstairs when he left. Said he found her in the tub when he came back. Still silent, lifeless. But detectives had already walked the house. They had already seen what the tub looked like. No steam, no moisture, no evidence of a recent bath. Just cold porcelain and a woman with damp hair that had already begun to dry. They pressed him. The timeline didn't work. The dogs weren't wet. He hadn't made calls or texts that matched the window he claimed. David repeated the same thing. She slipped. It was tragic. That's all it was. But the medical examiner was already preparing a different story. One that had nothing to do with a fall. Blunt force trauma to the head. Multiple strikes. Then strangulation. This wasn't an accident. This was personal. Prolonged. Violent. Detective Barbara Sharp leaned in across the table. Her voice low. Her words sharper than before. The evidence and her body speak for itself. And your story is BS. David didn't react. No anger. No panic. No tears. After nearly 14 hours, with no confession and not enough yet to charge him, detectives let him walk out of the station. But they didn't stop watching. They knew something was wrong. The truth wasn't in the words he spoke. It was in the details he left out. And now they were ready to start pulling his life apart, piece by piece. He left the station without charges. But the investigation had only just begun. Detectives placed David Trance under quiet surveillance. They watched his movements, tracked his spending, searched through financial records with a microscope. That's when the paper trail started to unfold. The home renovation, the one David spoke of with such pride, wasn't funded by him. Every invoice, every payment, every contractor, it was Shawnee who paid the bills. Shawnee who signed the checks. Shawnee who carried the cost. She was pouring money into a house she didn't own. And David? He was quietly moving cash from their shared accounts into his name, from checking to savings, savings to certificates, quiet withdrawals that added up, a pattern that had started before Shanti's death and continued after. There was life insurance, over $350,000. David was the sole beneficiary. But that wasn't all. If Shawnee died, and David stayed free, he stood to inherit nearly $1 million. The house, the money, the rest of her assets. He told friends they were happy, that there was no trouble between them, that the renovations were all part of a shared dream. But investigators uncovered something else, something far more personal. A letter. Shawnee had written about the strain in the marriage, the growing distance, her frustrations, her fear that she was carrying everything alone, the feeling that David wasn't who he seemed. To the outside world, it was a couple building their dream home. But the reality, the one hidden in quiet bank transfers and unsent letters, painted a different picture. The kind where trust was long gone, and only one of them knew it was about to end. For months had passed since Shanti's death. David Trance had moved out of the house on East Copeland. He was living with his mother now, in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. A man waiting for the world to forget. But detectives hadn't. On August 29th, 2018, they returned, this time with a warrant. They searched his mother's home, every room, every drawer, every corner. And in a small container, tucked away with no explanation, they found it. Shawnee's engagement ring, the one that vanished from her hand the day she died. The one David said had been stolen. There was no dust on it, no evidence it had been sitting there for long. The diamond was still mounted and scathed. It hadn't been pawned. It hadn't been lost. It had been taken. Detective Sharp stood over the evidence bag, the diamond catching the light. David's attorneys would later argue that investigators had simply missed it during the first search of the home, that it had never really left. But the location, the timeline, the contradiction, all of it made the story harder to believe. They had waited, watched, dug through financials and motives, and now they had what they needed. That same day, the grand jury returned its indictment. First-degree murder. David Trance was arrested at his mother's house. Calm as ever. No resistance. No emotion. Behind him, a life once framed by floor plans and HGTV dreams was replaced by a cold cell and the weight of a charge that had taken 4 months to build and would take 5 years to bring to trial. October 2023. The courtroom was packed. 5 years had passed since Shawnee Cooper Trance was found dead in the bathtub. 5 years of silence, waiting, preparation, and now, finally, a trial. David Trance sat at the defense table in a gray suit, his expression fixed, unreadable. Across from him, prosecutors began laying out the evidence, not just the forensic details, but the story underneath. The tension, the motive, the greed. Shawnee's blood had been found in the bedroom, not the bathroom where she was discovered. It had soaked into the bedding, smeared along the bed frame. Forensic analysts testified that the bedroom, not the tub, was the true scene of the attack. Her skull had been fractured. There were multiple points of impact, not consistent with a fall. She had been strangled, slowly, with force, for minutes. The prosecution didn't just build a case, they built a timeline. They brought in friends, financial experts, even a host of zombie house flipping, Keith Ory, who recalled meeting Shawnee days before her death. He told the jury her demeanor had changed, that she had looked stressed, on edge, irritated, as if something was unraveling. But the most compelling part of the state's case wasn't on a screen or in a file. It was Jackson. Now 13 years old, Shanti's son sat quietly behind the prosecutors, day after day, in the same seat. Watching, listening, waiting. The defense called no witnesses. They argued the police had made up their minds too quickly, that they ignored other possibilities, that the evidence was circumstantial. But the jury was listening, and the evidence, the ring, the blood, the money, never looked away. On October 18th, 2023, after 5 days of testimony and nearly 5 years of waiting, the jury returned. 12 people, for hours of deliberation. One decision, guilty, first-degree murder. David Trance showed no reaction, no words, no tears, no apology, just a blank stare ahead as the verdict was read. Behind him, Jackson sat with his hands folded in his lap. The boy who lost his mother, the boy who came to court every day, the boy who stood now to speak. He stepped forward with a statement, quiet, clear, and steady. It's like a hole in my heart that I can't fill or fix. He wasn't reading from notes. He didn't need to. He spoke from a place far deeper, from a space left empty by violence, by betrayal, by silence. My mom deserved the world. She gave everything to everyone, and she didn't deserve what happened to her. No one in that courtroom could disagree. Shawnee Cooper Trance had paid for the home, the renovations, the future they were supposed to share. She believed in building something lasting. But in the end, she was the one left behind, not in the plans, not in the deed, not even in the final story he tried to tell. Her voice never made it into the show, but through the testimony, through the evidence, through the people who refused to forget, she was heard. And the man who tried to take everything from her lost it all. If you want more stories like this, real, disturbing, unforgettable, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters, and the next story might be closer than you think. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay safe.